I am Natalie, 33 years old, and on Mother's Day, my own mother bought a full page in the local newspaper to publicly apologize for raising a failure. That failure was me. She exposed everything for the whole city to see. My old college report cards, doctored pay stubs from 6 years ago, my supposedly ruined credit score, and even my home address. My father, Richard, bought 100 copies and mailed them to our extended relatives, my coworkers, and what he assumed was my boss. My sister Olivia actually framed the article and hung it in her luxury bridal boutique with a caption that read, "Do not end up like my sister." I just smiled. A few weeks later, they lost absolutely everything they owned, and several of them faced federal prison time. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who tried to destroy your life. The catastrophe began on a bright Sunday morning at the Oak Ridge Country Club. The dining room was a sea of pastel dresses and expensive linen suits. My mother Patricia had insisted on hosting a lavish brunch for our extended family. Aunts, uncles, and cousins filled 3 circular tables near the windows. I sat at the edge of the main table, quietly sipping my sparkling water, already exhausted by the performative nature of the gathering. Across from me sat my younger sister Olivia, practically glowing in a designer silk dress. Beside her was her husband Jamal. He was an investment broker who wore custom-tailored suits and spent every family gathering loudly, giving unsolicited financial advice. He was currently boasting about his cryptocurrency triumphs. My father sat at the head of the table, nodding approvingly at Jamal, while ignoring me completely. This was the established dynamic. I was the invisible disappointment, the freelance bookkeeper, who supposedly struggled to make rent, while Olivia and Jamal were the shining examples of millennial success. Right as the waiters began clearing our appetizer plates, Patricia stood up. She smoothed the front of her cream-colored dress and picked up a silver spoon, tapping it sharply against her crystal mimosa glass. The ringing sound cut through the low chatter of the dining room. Conversations at our tables ceased immediately. "Thank you all for being here today," Patricia began, her voice projecting across the room with practiced theatricality. "Motherhood is supposed to be a woman's greatest joy. It is a journey of sacrifice, guidance, and unconditional love. We pour our hearts into our children, hoping they will reflect our values and build successful lives that we can be proud to share with our friends." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the faces of my aunts and uncles. She offered a warm maternal smile to Olivia. "I am so incredibly blessed to have a daughter like Olivia and a brilliant son-in-law like Jamal. You two are the absolute pride of the family. You embody the success and prestige that Richard and I worked so hard to cultivate." Then her smile vanished. Her expression morphed into a mask of profound, manufactured tragedy. She pressed a perfectly manicured hand to her chest. But motherhood also brings unspeakable heartbreak. It brings the agonizing realization that sometimes, no matter how much love and money you provide, a child simply chooses the path of failure and drags your good name through the mud. The atmosphere at the tables shifted instantly. The polite smiles on my relatives' faces faltered, replaced by uncomfortable, darting glances. My stomach tightened, though I kept my face entirely neutral. I knew exactly where this was going, but I had no idea the terrifying scale of what she was about to do next. Patricia reached down beneath her chair and pulled out a thick stack of freshly printed newspapers. They were the Sunday edition of the Local Observer, a paper read by practically everyone in our affluent suburban community. She handed the stack to my father, who began passing them down the table with a grim, righteous nod. "I have carried this heavy shame for 33 years," Patricia continued, her voice trembling with artificial tears. "I have lied to my friends to protect her reputation. I have made excuses for her lack of ambition, her poor choices, and her embarrassing financial state. But I can no longer hide the truth. I will no longer let her failures stain the legacy of this family." The newspapers reached the end of the table. My uncle unfolded his copy, his eyes widening in absolute shock. I looked down at the copy placed in front of me. There, taking up an entire full-page advertisement, was my face. It was a terrible, unflattering photo from my early 20s. Above it, printed in massive bold letters, was the headline, "A Mother's Apology to the Community." As my relatives gasped, Patricia pointed a trembling finger directly at me across the crystal centerpieces. "Look at her. Look at the disgrace she has brought to our name. The advertisement exposes everything. Her abysmal college transcripts, her pathetic pay stubs, her ruined credit score of 520. It is all there in black and white. I bought this page to formally apologize to our community for raising a child who contributes nothing to society." The silence in the country club was deafening. The only sound was the rustling of newspaper pages as dozens of relatives stared at my printed financial ruin. Jamal leaned back in his chair, a cruel smirk spreading across his face as he scanned the article. Olivia looked positively delighted, sipping her mimosa while watching the public execution of my dignity unfold. Patricia stood tall, wiping away a single imaginary tear. "You have humiliated us for the last time, Natalie. We are cutting you off completely. You are a failure and now the whole world knows it." I stared down at the crisp newsprint resting next to my mimosa. The layout was professionally designed, meaning my parents had paid top dollar for this public execution. In the center was my sophomore year college transcript from the one semester I suffered a severe bout of pneumonia, displaying a glaring string of low grades. Below that was a pay stub dated 6 years ago. But looking closely, the numbers were blatantly wrong. The gross pay had been heavily altered, manipulated to make it look like I was earning less than minimum wage. They had even printed my exact apartment address in bold black font, inviting the entire city to pity the struggling girl who lived there. But the absolute centerpiece of the advertisement was a credit score report. The number 520 glared up at me like a neon warning sign. Jamal burst out laughing, his deep voice echoing across the dining room. He adjusted the cuffs of his expensive suit and leaned back, shaking his head in mock disbelief. "I have to say, Natalie, as an investment broker, seeing a score that low physically hurts my eyes. I mean 520. That is beyond pathetic. You could not even finance a rusted bicycle with that kind of history. If you had just come to me and asked for help, I could have given you some basic financial literacy lessons. I could have shown you how real money works. But I suppose you cannot teach someone who refuses to learn. You always were too stubborn, and now look at you, bankrupt and publicly humiliated. She refuses to learn because she thinks she knows better than all of us," my father Richard boomed from the head of the table. He crossed his arms, looking immensely satisfied. "Do not think this is just a local embarrassment, Natalie. I wanted to be absolutely thorough. I purchased 100 physical copies of this exact Sunday edition. I spent all of yesterday morning stuffing envelopes. I mailed a copy to every single aunt, uncle, and second cousin. But more importantly, I mailed a priority envelope directly to that little accounting firm you freelance for. I addressed it straight to the managing director. By tomorrow morning, your boss will know exactly what kind of financial disaster they have working on their books. You are going to be out on the street." Olivia chimed in, adjusting her diamond earrings and giving me a look of pure pity. "It is for the best, honestly. People need to know the truth. You have been riding on our family name for too long, pretending you are doing fine in your little apartment while the rest of us actually build wealth. Mom and Dad are just ripping off the Band-Aid. It is tough love. Maybe getting fired will finally force you to wake up and get a real job. You should be thanking them." The entire table waited for my collapse. My aunts were gripping their cloth napkins, bracing for the inevitable tears, the screaming, the desperate begging for forgiveness. They expected me to flee to the restroom in shame, or drop to my knees and plead with my father to call my boss and take it all back. They wanted a spectacular show of my complete and utter defeat. But I did not give them one. I did not feel the hot sting of tears. I did not feel the crushing weight of humiliation pressing down on my chest. Instead, my mind, honed by years of rigorous forensic auditing, locked onto cold, hard facts. I looked at the doctored pay stub again. Falsifying financial documents is a severe federal offense. I looked at the credit score. I knew for an absolute fact my actual credit score was 810. I monitored it monthly, which meant the 520 score printed in the paper was pulled using my social security number but tied to massive debt I did not create. This was textbook identity theft. And then I replayed my father's booming confession in my head. He had physically mailed altered financial documents using the United States Postal Service. He had just confessed to mail fraud in front of 30 witnesses. I slowly reached out and picked up the newspaper. I folded it neatly, precisely in half, then in half again, and tucked it securely under my arm. I pushed my chair back and stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored blazer. The silence in the room was absolute. Every single person was staring at me, holding their breath, waiting for the explosion. I looked directly at my mother. Her smug, victorious smile faltered slightly as she met my eyes. There was no pain in my gaze, only a terrifying, icy calm. "Thank you, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly steady, carrying effortlessly across the dining room. "This is truly the most remarkable gift you could have ever given me. I will be sure to put it to very good use." I turned to my father, offering him a polite, chilling smile. "And thank you, Dad, for being so incredibly thorough with the mail. You have no idea how much time you just saved me." I did not wait for a response. I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit of the dining room. My posture was flawless, my strides measured and confident. I did not run. I did not look down. Behind me, the anticipated murmurs of pity never came. Instead, a confused, heavy silence blanketed the country club. They had laid a trap, and they were entirely bewildered that I had just walked right through it without a scratch. "Where are you going?" Jamal called out, his arrogant tone suddenly laced with confusion. "You cannot even afford a cab home." I did not look back. I simply pushed through the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the bright sunlight. A cold, predatory smile finally spread across my face. Monday morning arrived with the sharp clarity of a newly sharpened blade. I walked through the revolving glass doors of Apex Financial Forensics, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. The lobby was a symphony of modern corporate power, all brushed steel, minimalist art, and hushed efficiency. I bypassed the receptionist and headed straight down the executive corridor. I was no longer the targeted daughter from yesterday. I was a senior partner at a top forensic auditing firm. I approached the main conference room. The walls were entirely transparent, floor-to-ceiling acoustic glass, designed for high-stakes corporate autopsies. Inside sat Harrison. At 58, he was a CEO who dismantled embezzlement rings with just a spreadsheet and black coffee. He was already waiting for me. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped inside. The air conditioning hummed softly. Sitting dead center on the massive mahogany conference table was the Sunday edition of the Local Observer. The manila envelope it had arrived in rested beside it, bearing my father's distinct, aggressive handwriting. "Good morning," Natalie Harrison said, his voice calm and gravelly. He did not look angry. He did not look disappointed. He looked intensely curious. "Good morning, Harrison," I replied, taking the ergonomic leather chair directly across from him. "I see the morning mail has already been delivered." He tapped the newspaper with his silver luxury pen. "It arrived via priority post about an hour ago. Marked strictly confidential, urgent attention of the CEO." I must admit, when I opened it, I expected a whistleblower tip on a corporate client. Instead, I found a full-page advertisement dedicated to dismantling my top senior auditor. I kept my posture rigid and professional. "I apologize for the distraction. My family has a rather dramatic flair for expressing their dissatisfaction with my life choices." Harrison waved his hand dismissively. "Do not apologize. In our line of work, we deal with hostile takeovers, shell companies, and offshore money laundering. Family drama is just amateur hour fraud." "But this," he leaned forward, pushing the newspaper toward me. "This is fascinating. Your father spent a considerable amount of money to mail this directly to my desk. He wanted you terminated. And are you going to terminate me? I asked, meeting his gaze without flinching. Harrison actually chuckled. Natalie, you recovered $12 million in hidden assets last quarter. You have a flawless conviction rate. I would not fire you if you had robbed a casino. However, as your mentor and your CEO, I am disturbed by the data presented in this incredibly public document. Not because I believe it, but because it exists at all. He pressed a button on his console, bringing the conference room smartboard to life. He had already scanned the newspaper page and projected it onto the massive screen. We are auditors, Natalie. Let us audit this. I approached the display. The humiliation from yesterday was entirely gone, replaced by the clinical precision of my profession. Let us start with the credit score, I said, pointing to the glowing number 520. Harrison tapped his keyboard. I ran a secure soft pull on your file the moment I saw this. I needed to ensure our firm's security clearance had not been compromised. He hit the enter key. A secure dashboard materialized next to the newspaper scan. Natalie, your actual verified credit score is 810. You have 0 missed payments, a flawless history, and substantial untouched credit lines. Relief was quickly eclipsed by cold realization. The number in the newspaper is not mine, I said, my voice dropping to a serious analytical register. But the advertisement displays my correct social security number, partially redacted my correct date of birth, and my current address. They did not just pull a random number out of thin air. They pulled a legitimate credit report tied to my identity. Harrison nodded, his eyes narrowing. Exactly. Which means there is a shadow profile operating under your social security number. A secondary credit file generated by massive debt that you are entirely unaware of. Someone has bifurcated your financial identity. I turned my attention to the next piece of evidence on the board. The pay stub. My mother had proudly showcased it as proof of my supposed poverty. I stepped closer to the screen, examining the pixels. Look at the typography on the gross income line, I instructed, highlighting the area with a laser pointer. The font kerning is entirely inconsistent with the standard automated payroll software used by that employer 6 years ago. The spacing is cramped. Harrison squinted at the projection. You are right. And look at the federal tax deduction ratio. It does not align with the gross pay listed. If you were making the poverty wages printed there, your tax bracket would reflect a lower withholding percentage. The math does not balance. It is a digital composite, I concluded, feeling a rush of adrenaline. They took a legitimate pay stub, likely from a tax return I filed years ago, and altered the income values using basic photo editing software. They left the tax deductions untouched, which breaks the mathematical formula of the document. Harrison leaned back, tenting his fingers. Falsifying a financial document and distributing it through the United States Postal Service. That elevates this from a petty family squabble to a multi-jurisdictional federal crime. I walked back to the table and picked up the physical newspaper. My brother-in-law Jamal is an investment broker. He has the technical knowledge to manipulate credit files and bypass standard verification protocols. 3 years ago, I foolishly allowed him to handle a minor tax filing for me. He took my data. My family believes I am a failure because Jamal and Olivia are secretly living a lavish lifestyle funded by fraud. They are actively using my name as the dumping ground for their liabilities. Harrison locked eyes with me. Trace every single fraudulent dime. I nodded once, standing up from the conference table. The directive was crystal clear. I gathered my blazer and my briefcase, leaving the altered newspaper resting on the polished mahogany. I walked out of the glass-walled room, my mind already building a structured flowchart of digital evidence. Before I plunged into the federal databases, I needed to look my family in the eye one more time. I needed to see their reaction when I asked the right questions. I drove my car across town to the historic downtown district where storefronts boasted European architecture and exorbitant rent prices. Olivia owned a luxury bridal boutique right on the main avenue. The exterior was immaculate, featuring floor-to-ceiling bay windows displaying custom silk gowns draped over velvet mannequins. Gold leaf lettering on the glass spelled out her business name. My parents had funded this entire enterprise, pouring supposedly massive amounts of capital into securing the lease and the inventory. I parked down the street and walked toward the entrance, my forensic auditor brain calculating the monthly overhead required to maintain a footprint in this zip code. A delicate silver bell chimed as I pushed open the heavy glass door. The interior smelled of expensive vanilla candles and fresh orchids. Plush white sofas were arranged strategically around circular mirrors. Two bridal consultants were bustling around the back carrying sheer veils, but my eyes did not linger on the dresses. They locked immediately onto the custom marble reception desk positioned at the front of the boutique. Sitting in a prominent position, intended for every single customer to see, was a heavy, ornate silver frame. Inside the frame was the full-page Sunday advertisement from the local newspaper. The doctored pay stub, my college transcript, and the fake 520 credit score were illuminated by a small, elegant display light. Beneath the silver frame, bolted directly into the marble, was a custom-engraved brass plaque. The plaque read in pristine cursive lettering, "Do not end up like my sister. Let us help you marry into a secure future." I stopped in the middle of the showroom. A cold, sharp wave of disbelief washed over me, immediately replaced by a profound clinical anger. They had not just humiliated me at a private country club brunch. They had weaponized my stolen identity as a marketing gimmick to sell wedding dresses to local socialites. Olivia was standing near the fitting rooms holding a clipboard and smiling brightly at a wealthy-looking woman and her teenage daughter. Olivia wore a tailored white pantsuit, her hair perfectly styled, exuding the ultimate image of a successful young entrepreneur. She glanced over her shoulder and spotted me. Her bright professional smile vanished for a split second, replaced by a flash of genuine shock. She clearly expected me to be hiding in my apartment crying over my ruined reputation. I walked straight past the velvet ropes and the display mannequins, stopping directly in front of the wealthy client. I turned to look at my younger sister. "Good afternoon, Olivia," I said, keeping my voice perfectly modulated, pleasant and devoid of any emotional cracking. "I see you have updated the decor at the reception desk. It is certainly a bold choice for a bridal shop." The client looked back and forth between us, her brow furrowing as she recognized my face from the framed newspaper article she had likely just stared at while signing in. Olivia recovered quickly, her expression hardening into a mask of arrogant dismissal. "Excuse us for just a moment, Mrs. Harrington," Olivia said sweetly. "My sister is having a difficult week. I need to handle this distraction." Olivia grabbed my elbow, attempting to pull me forcefully toward the back office. I planted my feet firmly, refusing to move an inch. I gently but forcefully removed her hand from my arm. "We can talk right here," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet boutique. "Are you out of your mind?" Olivia hissed, dropping her voice to a furious whisper. "You do not belong here. You are ruining my consultation. Get out before I call security and have you physically dragged onto the pavement. You have already embarrassed this family enough." "I am not the one who framed a fraudulent financial document and displayed it to the public," I replied, maintaining my icy composure. "I am simply admiring the lengths you will go to in order to feel superior." Before Olivia could respond, the heavy wooden door to the back office swung open. My mother, Patricia, marched out. She wore a pristine emerald green dress and carried a stack of fabric swatches. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me standing in the center of the showroom. Natalie Patricia gasped, her voice shrill with indignation. "What on earth are you doing here? Have you no shame at all?" I looked at my mother, noting the way she immediately moved to stand shoulder to shoulder with Olivia, forming a united front against the family scapegoat. "I am just visiting the new marketing display, Mom," I said, pointing toward the reception desk. "I must admit, I am impressed by the sheer audacity of it." Patricia lifted her chin, her eyes flashing with defensive pride. "Do not use that tone with us. That display is highly effective creative marketing. Olivia is running a business. She is showing young women the importance of making smart choices, of marrying well, of avoiding the pathetic, destitute life you have built for yourself. It is a cautionary tale. Our clients appreciate the transparency. You call identity theft creative marketing, I asked, tilting my head slightly. Olivia scoffed, rolling her eyes. Oh, please. You are just bitter because the whole town knows you are a broke loser. You should be thanking me for making you relevant. I dropped the polite facade. Tell me, Olivia, how exactly did you obtain my social security number? Before Olivia could stumble through a fabricated excuse, a heavy set of footsteps echoed from the rear corridor. Jamal pushed his way through the velvet curtains that separated the showroom from the VIP fitting areas. He was wearing a custom navy blue suit that strained slightly against his broad shoulders, his chest puffed out in a textbook display of aggressive posturing. He marched directly toward me, not stopping until the toes of his polished leather Oxfords were mere inches from my own shoes. He towered over me deliberately, using his height to cast a shadow across my face, attempting the kind of physical intimidation he likely used to bully his junior brokers at the investment firm. Are we seriously doing this right now? Jamal demanded, his voice a low, threatening rumble that was entirely at odds with the delicate bridal atmosphere. He crossed his arms over his chest, glaring down at me with unvarnished contempt. You barge into my wife's place of business, upset her wealthy clients, and start demanding answers like you have some kind of authority here. You have no authority, Natalie. You have absolutely nothing. You are a walking financial disaster, and you should be on your knees thanking us for finally holding up a mirror so you can see rock bottom. I did not step back. I held my ground, tilting my chin up just enough to meet his gaze squarely. I am not asking for your financial advice, Jamal. I am asking a very specific, legally binding question. I looked past his broad shoulders, locking eyes with my sister again. How did you access my full, unredacted social security number to pull the credit report that you so proudly framed on your reception desk? Olivia crossed her arms, looking to her husband for backup. Patricia let out a loud, exasperated sigh, waving her hand as if swatting away a persistent fly. Oh, listen to her trying to sound like a corporate lawyer, Patricia mocked. Always trying to sound so much smarter than everyone else in the room. This is exactly why you have no friends and no husband, Natalie. You interrogate your own family over a piece of paper. It is not a piece of paper, Mom. I replied, my tone dangerously even. It is a federal identifier, and obtaining it without consent constitutes a felony. Jamal threw his head back and let out a booming, arrogant laugh that rattled the crystal display cases. A felony, he sneered, shaking his head as if dealing with a stubborn, slow-witted toddler. Listen to yourself. You are completely delusional. Nobody stole anything from you, Natalie. You practically handed it to us on a silver platter. I kept my expression entirely blank, letting the heavy silence stretch out, giving him the rope he desperately wanted to hang himself with. Jamal stepped even closer, his expensive heavy cologne suffocating in the small space between us. He leaned down, his voice dripping with condescension. 3 years ago, when you were supposedly drowning in your pathetic little freelance bookkeeping gigs, you came crying to the family. You asked me, a certified high-earning investment broker, to help you file your taxes because you were too incompetent to understand basic deductions. You handed over your tax documents, your bank statements, and your precious social security number. You signed the paperwork. Family has no secrets, Natalie. When you give me your financial life to fix, I keep the records. It is called being thorough. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Jamal stood there, chest puffed out, an arrogant smirk plastered across his handsome face, completely oblivious to the magnitude of what he had just confessed. He thought he was putting me in my place. He thought he was proving his intellectual superiority. My mind, trained by years of hunting down corporate embezzlers and unraveling complex financial webs, instantly snapped the pieces into place. The tax filing from 3 years ago. I had indeed allowed him to file a simple return for me back when I was keeping my real career a secret and pretending to be a struggling freelancer to avoid my parents' constant demands for money. To file those taxes, Jamal would have required me to sign a standard IRS power of attorney form. A form that, if altered or misused, would give him sweeping, unrestricted access to my financial identity. That was the pipeline. That was how he bypassed the bank security questions. That was how he managed to open 5 black credit cards and secure a massive $400,000 commercial loan in my name. He had weaponized that old tax document to clone my financial existence. You really think you understand how money works? Jamal continued, misinterpreting my calculating silence for defeat. He chuckled, looking back at Olivia and Patricia, who were both smiling now, empowered by his relentless bullying. You sit in your tiny apartment balancing ledgers for pennies, calling yourself a bookkeeper. You have zero concept of high finance, corporate leverage, or building an empire. I move millions of dollars before you even wake up. I know the system inside and out, so do not come into my wife's boutique throwing around words like felony when you do not even understand how a basic credit pull works. You gave us the information. We used it to show the world the truth. End of story. Olivia stepped up beside him, resting her hand possessively on his tailored sleeve. Exactly. Now I suggest you walk out that door before Jamal calls the police and has you arrested for trespassing. We have a luxury business to run. We do not have time to deal with your psychotic breakdowns. I looked at the three of them. My mother brimming with toxic pride. My sister draped in luxury funded entirely by my stolen identity. And my brother-in-law, a man so blinded by his own arrogance that he had just casually admitted to the exact origin point of a massive federal fraud scheme in front of witnesses. I did not yell. I did not scream. I did not throw a tantrum or try to slap the smug grin off Jamal's face. The emotional wounded sister they were trying to provoke simply did not exist anymore. In her place was a senior forensic auditor who had just been handed the smoking gun. I see, I said quietly. My voice was so calm, so utterly devoid of anger, that Jamal's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. You kept the records because you are thorough, and family has no secrets. Jamal crossed his arms tighter, his jaw jutting forward. That is right. I nodded slowly, committing every detail of his arrogant posture to memory. I took one step back, putting a polite professional distance between us. I adjusted the strap of my leather briefcase on my shoulder. Thank you, Jamal, I said, maintaining direct, unblinking eye contact with him. You have been incredibly helpful today. Truly. Your financial literacy is going to make the next few weeks very interesting for all of us. I turned to my mother and sister, offering them a brief, polite nod. Good luck with the boutique, Olivia. The new location must have required a tremendous amount of capital to secure. I am sure you are very proud of how you funded it. Without waiting for them to decipher the underlying threat in my words, I pivoted on my heel and walked toward the exit. I could feel their confused, angry glares burning into my back as I pushed open the heavy glass door. The silver bell chimed a cheerful farewell. I stepped out onto the sunlit pavement, my mind already drafting the federal subpoenas. The trap was set, and they had walked right into it. I drove back to the towering glass and steel headquarters of Apex Financial Forensics with a singular burning focus. The midday traffic was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel, but my mind was already deep inside the server mainframes. I bypassed my standard cubicle and headed straight for the secure sublevel. This floor housed the heavy-duty forensic terminals, isolated from the main network, air-gapped to prevent external tracking and equipped with federal-tier access keys. I swiped my biometric badge and pressed my thumb to the scanner. The heavy reinforced door clicked open, sealing me inside the windowless, climate-controlled room. The humming of the servers was the only sound. I sat down at the primary terminal and woke the dual monitors. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. I did not log into a standard consumer credit portal. That was for amateurs. I bypassed the civilian interfaces and launched our proprietary forensic tracing software, a program designed to dissect shell companies and unearth offshore accounts. I entered my own social security number into the search field. I ran a deep dive biometric and financial audit, commanding the system to scrape every database, every tax registry, every property deed, and every credit bureau inquiry linked to those 9 digits over the past 36 months. The system processed the request. Lines of encrypted code scrolled down the left monitor in rapid succession. I waited, my pulse steady, my eyes tracking the data packets. A soft chime echoed in the quiet room. The right monitor populated with the results. Harrison had been absolutely correct. The screen displayed a complete bifurcation of my financial identity. There were 2 distinct profiles operating simultaneously under my social security number. Profile Alpha was mine. It was pristine. It showed my verified address, my actual salary as a senior partner, my modest mortgage, and my flawless 810 credit score. It was a digital ghost, quiet and perfectly maintained. Then I opened Profile Beta. The screen flared with red warning indicators. This was the shadow profile. This was the monstrosity Jamal had birthed, using my forged tax documents. The credit score glared back at me in bright crimson digital ink. 520. It was not a fake number generated for a newspaper advertisement. It was entirely real, and it was tied directly to my name. I cracked my knuckles and dove into the liability columns. I needed to see exactly how they had burned my shadow identity to the ground. I opened the revolving credit accounts first. The system pulled the ledger. 5 elite high-limit black credit cards materialized on the screen. Every single one of them was maxed out to the absolute limit. The outstanding balances were staggering. I ran a transaction trace on the most recently opened card. The metadata painted a vivid picture of extreme unchecked narcissism. The line items flooded the screen. $10,000 at a luxury car dealership for a down payment on a vehicle registered to Jamal. $15,000 in a single weekend at a high-stakes offshore cryptocurrency exchange platform. Thousands of dollars spent at high-end steakhouses, VIP bottle service, at downtown nightclubs, and premium country club memberships. Jamal had literally funded his entire alpha male broker persona using my stolen identity. He was living the life of a financial titan on the back of my ruined shadow credit. I switched to the next card. The spending patterns shifted immediately. Wholesale fabric purchases from European textile distributors, exorbitant monthly retainers for high society public relations firms, thousands spent on custom Italian marble fixtures and crystal chandeliers. This was Olivia. She had used my credit to finance the lavish inventory and interior design of her supposedly self-made bridal boutique. My parents had likely provided the initial seed money, but Olivia had fueled her explosive, unsustainable growth by bleeding my shadow profile dry. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. But the credit cards were just the beginning. The revolving debt explained the low credit score, but it did not explain the sheer volume of capital required to secure a second boutique location. I needed the anchor weight. I needed the massive influx of cash that Jamal had engineered. I deployed a secondary algorithm searching for commercial liens and corporate debt instruments tied to the shadow profile. The system churned for 3 tense minutes. Then a massive red block materialized at the bottom of the screen. A commercial business loan. I clicked the file, expanding the details. The principal amount was exactly $400,000. The loan had been originated 2 years ago through a mid-tier regional bank that lacked rigorous biometric verification protocols. I pulled the origination documents. The loan was registered to a limited liability company. I ran a cross-reference on the corporate registry. The LLC was named Elite Bridal Holdings. The managing directors listed on the corporate charter were Jamal and Olivia. But the sole personal guarantor, the individual bearing the entire legal and financial burden if the business failed, was me. I stared at the digital contract. Jamal had used the power of attorney form from my old tax filing. He had digitally altered the scope of the document, granting himself unrestricted authority to bind me to commercial debt. He had forged my electronic signature on a $400,000 promissory note, He had funneled the cash directly into elite bridal holdings, using the capital to aggressively expand the boutique and cover his own disastrous day trading losses. The puzzle was complete. They had built their entire empire on a foundation of my stolen identity. They had drained the shadow profile until it collapsed into a 520 credit score, and then, in a display of unprecedented toxic arrogance my mother had taken, that ruined score, printed it in the Sunday paper, and used it to publicly shame me for being a failure. They had ruined me financially in secret, and then weaponized that ruin to destroy me socially. I sat back in the ergonomic chair, the harsh blue light of the monitors reflecting in my eyes. I did not feel panic. I did not feel fear. I felt a cold, absolute certainty. The evidence was irrefutable. Every transaction, every forged signature, every wire transfer was perfectly preserved in the federal banking logs. They had left a digital paper trail a mile wide. I pressed a button on the terminal, initiating a secure download. I exported the shadow profile, the credit card statements, the commercial loan origination documents, and the forged power of attorney into an encrypted tamper-proof dossier. I watched the progress bar hit 100%. The flash drive glowed green. Jamal thought he was a genius. Olivia thought she was a self-made boss. My parents thought they were the pinnacle of high society. They had no idea they were just incredibly sloppy criminals. I pulled the flash drive from the server and dropped it into my blazer pocket. I had the ammunition. Now I needed them to confess to the debt willingly. I needed to trap them in a lie so absolute that no defense attorney could ever unravel it. It was time to play the desperate broken daughter. It was time to invite my family to dinner. I drove straight back to the office, my mind racing. Before making that phone call to arrange our family reunion, I needed to map every cent of the $400,000 commercial loan. I plugged the encrypted flash drive back into my terminal. I needed the exact trajectory of the stolen funds. Criminals always believe cash leaves no trail once it moves through shell accounts. They are wrong. Money has memory. It leaves digital fingerprints on every ledger. I started by tracing Jamal's mechanical execution of the fraud. 3 years ago, I handed Jamal my tax folder. Inside was my annual wage form, bank routing numbers, and a federal power of attorney meant to allow him to file my returns. I pulled up the forged document from the bank's origination file. Jamal had meticulously spliced the digital file. He lifted my signature vector from the tax consent form and applied it to a blanket financial proxy. He notarized it using a fraudulent seal acquired through a corrupt contact. Armed with that weaponized paper, he marched into a mid-tier commercial bank and pledged my pristine credit history as the absolute guarantor for elite bridal holdings. The bank wired the funds into a newly minted corporate checking account. I ran a wire trace protocol on that specific account. The screen lit up with outgoing transfers, painting a pathetic picture of desperation and greed. The first massive hemorrhage of cash went straight to Olivia. Exactly $210,000 was wired to a commercial real estate holding company and a textile importer. These wires perfectly aligned with the grand opening of Olivia's second boutique location. Her original store had been secretly bleeding money for 18 months. Her inventory was outdated, foot traffic non-existent, and rent in arrears. My parents refused to liquidate their retirement portfolios to save her failing vanity project. So Jamal and Olivia decided to save the golden child's reputation by stealing from the family's scapegoat. They literally built the sparkling chandeliers, the custom marble reception desk, and the velvet fitting rooms of that new boutique using my financial lifeblood. They presented themselves as self-made success stories, hiding that their empire was a parasite attached to my social security number. Then I traced the remaining $190,000. This is where Jamal's arrogant facade completely disintegrated on my screen. He styled himself as a financial mastermind, a wealthy broker who lectured everyone at Thanksgiving about market leverage and decentralized currency. The wire transfers told a drastically different story. I watched the digital money flow from the corporate loan account directly into 3 offshore cryptocurrency exchanges, and a highly leveraged day trading platform. Jamal was not a financial genius. He was a degenerate gambler wearing a custom suit and a fake smile. The trading logs revealed an embarrassing pattern of impulsive high-risk trades driven by pure greed. He dumped $50,000 into a volatile meme coin that collapsed 48 hours later. He leveraged $80,000 on aggressive margin calls in the tech sector, getting wiped out when the quarterly earnings reports dropped below expectations. He lost the entire $190,000 in less than 7 months. I leaned closer, my eyes scanning the devastating sequence of losses. He had panicked. To cover the minimum monthly payments on the massive commercial loan he fraudulently chained to my name, he started opening those 5 elite black credit cards. He was using stolen credit to pay the interest on stolen debt. It was a classic desperate Ponzi structure, and it was entirely balanced on my back. When the credit cards finally maxed out, the payments stopped. The loan went into default. The late fees compounded. The shadow credit profile absolutely tanked, dragging the score down to that miserable 520. The revelation hit me with the force of a freight train, but it did not bring a single tear to my eye. Instead, it brought a supreme freezing clarity that sharpened every thought in my mind. For my entire life, my mother branded me a disappointment. My father treated me like an embarrassing burden to be hidden away. I spent years believing they simply disliked my personality or disapproved of my independent career choices. I was profoundly wrong. The truth was infinitely more sinister and calculated. They did not just hate me. They actively, intentionally designated me as the sacrificial lamb for Olivia's survival. When the golden child failed, when her bridal business went bankrupt, and her husband squandered their capital on gambling, my parents did not hold them accountable. Instead, they handed them the knife and allowed them to financially assassinate me. They looked at my quiet, perfectly stable life and decided I was nothing more than spare parts to be harvested for Olivia's luxury lifestyle. They had stolen my identity, wrecked my shadow credit, and funded a fraudulent empire. And then, in the ultimate act of narcissistic cruelty, my mother had taken the very credit score. They printed it in the Sunday newspaper, and used it to publicly shame me for being a failure. They set me on fire to keep Olivia warm, and then mocked me for burning. I stood up from the terminal. The cold, calculating rage pumping through my veins felt incredibly empowering. I was no longer the quiet daughter desperate for their approval. I was the architect of their impending destruction. I printed the wire transfer logs, the cryptocurrency loss statements, the forged power of attorney, and the commercial loan documents. I stacked the papers meticulously, placing them into a black leather folder. Every page was a nail in their coffins. I packed my briefcase and walked out of the secure sublevel, turning the lights off. I pulled my phone out and dialed my mother. It was time to set the stage. It was time to play the desperate, broken daughter. It was time to invite the thieves to dinner. I called my mother from the security of my car. I made my voice tremble, pushing air forcefully through my vocal cords to simulate hyperventilation and absolute panic. "Mom, please," I gasped into the receiver. "I need to see you. I need to see all of you. You were right. Everything is completely ruined." The satisfaction in her voice was immediate and chilling. She agreed to meet me at a high-end steakhouse downtown, promising to bring Richard, Olivia, and Jamal so we could have a real family discussion about my failures. I walked into the private dining room they had reserved. I deliberately wore an oversized, wrinkled sweater and absolutely no makeup. I made sure my eyes looked bloodshot by rubbing them aggressively in the parking lot before stepping inside. The visual shift from the confident, icy woman in the bridal boutique to this shattered, trembling shell of a human being made my family physically relax. They fed on weakness. They thrived on my supposed misery. Patricia was sipping a dry martini. Richard was already cutting into a premium ribeye steak. Olivia and Jamal sat across from them, looking like corporate royalty in their designer clothing. I pulled out a chair and sat down, letting my shoulders slump forward in defeat. I allowed a single, perfectly timed fake tear to roll down my cheek. With trembling hands, I placed a crumpled, heavily redacted, and incomplete credit report on the pristine white tablecloth. "I went to the bank today," I whispered, letting my voice crack with manufactured terror. After the newspaper article, I tried to figure out why my score was so low. I pulled my report. "I owe $400,000. I do not understand what is happening. I am so scared." Patricia rolled her eyes dramatically and took another delicate sip of her drink. "Oh, please, Natalie. Stop the theatrics right now. You are in a high-end restaurant. Try to have some class for once in your life. We all know you have been living way beyond your means for years. This is simply the consequence of your own poor choices. I have not been living beyond my means," I pleaded, leaning forward and clutching my hands together in a display of sheer desperation. "I swear to you, I live in a tiny apartment. I buy my groceries on sale. I do not know where this massive commercial loan came from. It says it is tied to a corporate entity, but I do not own a corporation. Someone stole my identity." Jamal let out a loud booming laugh that echoed off the mahogany walls of the private room. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, adjusting his gold cufflinks with a sickeningly smug expression. He looked at me with absolute unfiltered pity. "Identity theft. Really? That is the excuse you are going to use today. You freelance workers are all exactly the same. You take out bad loans you do not understand, you sign ridiculous contracts without reading the fine print, and then you cry identity theft when the massive bill finally comes due. It is pathetic." "But Jamal," I begged, pushing the crumpled paper across the table toward him. "You are an investment broker. You understand this complex financial system. Please just look at the origination dates on the file. I did not sign this document. I do not even know what Elite Bridal Holdings is." Olivia flinched slightly at the exact name of her own LLC, but she quickly covered her panic by scoffing loudly. "Are you seriously trying to drag my husband into your disgusting financial mess? Jamal works with multi-million-dollar portfolios, Natalie. He does not have the time or the patience to untangle your freelance accounting disasters. You probably clicked on a phishing email or signed a scam loan online because you were desperate for quick cash. You have always been gullible. I am telling the truth." I sobbed, hiding my face in my hands to conceal the utter lack of real tears in my eyes. "I am terrified. The bank is going to garnish my wages. They are going to take everything I have left. Dad, please help me. You have powerful lawyers on retainer. Can you help me trace this fraud?" Richard slammed his heavy steak knife down against the porcelain plate. The sharp, aggressive clatter made me jump, playing perfectly into my terrified victim persona. "Absolutely not." My father barked, his face flushing with intense anger. "I will not spend a single dime of my hard-earned money to clean up your catastrophic mistakes. You humiliated this family for years with your profound lack of ambition. Your mother was right to put that article in the paper. It was a necessary warning to the community about your toxic behavior." Patricia smiled softly at her husband, then turned her cold, calculating gaze back to me. "We brought you here tonight because we hoped you were finally ready to take accountability for your ruined life. But instead, you sit here weaving these ridiculous conspiracy theories about stolen identities and mysterious commercial loans. It is exactly why I bought that newspaper page. You completely refuse to live in reality." "What am I supposed to do?" I cried out, letting a note of pure hysteria enter my voice. "The loan is in default. The credit cards are maxed out to the absolute limit. I am going to end up in federal prison for debt I did not even spend." Jamal leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the table. He looked directly into my eyes, a patronizing, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Listen to me very carefully, Natalie. You are not going to prison, but you are financially ruined. That is just a cold, hard fact. The banking system does not care about your weak excuses. When a loan document has your social security number attached to it, you own that debt. Period. You signed away your financial security because you are hopelessly careless." He picked up the incomplete credit report I had brought, glanced at it with utter disdain, and tossed it back at me like it was garbage. "My professional advice: declare total bankruptcy. Liquidate whatever pathetic assets you have hiding in your apartment, accept that your life is effectively over, and start flipping burgers. Because no reputable financial institution is ever going to look at you again. You are a walking liability. But it is not my debt, I whimpered, staring down at the tablecloth. It is your debt, Jamal commanded, his voice dripping with supreme authority. You need to accept that reality right now. The sooner you admit that you ruined your own life, the sooner you can stop bothering us with your pathetic begging. Olivia nodded in enthusiastic agreement, checking her reflection in her phone camera. Jamal is entirely right. You need to take ownership, Natalie. Stop trying to blame invisible hackers for your own blatant incompetence. It is honestly exhausting to watch you play the victim. I kept my head bowed low, letting my shoulders shake, as if I were weeping uncontrollably. Inside, my heart was beating with a steady, triumphant rhythm. They were giving me exactly what I needed. Their staggering arrogance was blinding them to every single red flag I was laying down. They genuinely believed I was a broken, clueless victim who had absolutely no idea how to fight back against the banking system. They thought they had successfully gaslit me into believing the massive commercial debt was some sort of magical mistake I had made on my own. Okay, I whispered softly, wiping my dry eyes with the back of my wrinkled sleeve. Okay, I will take ownership of the debt. I will figure it out on my own. But I need to know how to structure a basic repayment plan so they do not arrest me. Jamal, since you know so much about these complex commercial loans, can you at least tell me how the banks calculate the default interest? I looked up at him, making my eyes wide and pleading. I was setting the final hook. I was positioning him as the supreme financial authority, stroking his massive, fragile ego so he would willingly step right into the dead center of the slaughterhouse. Jamal let out a theatrical sigh and swirled the expensive bourbon in his glass. He looked at me with the kind of smug satisfaction usually reserved for a king addressing a peasant. He took the bait completely. He simply could not resist the opportunity to showcase his financial brilliance. You really want to know how the banks calculate default interest on a commercial loan? He asked, his voice dripping with condescension. He leaned across the table. It is actually quite brilliant, Natalie. But you are asking the wrong question. You should be asking who had the leverage to secure a $400,000 commercial line of credit using the identity of a freelance bookkeeper. I widened my eyes, forcing my breathing to become shallow. What are you saying? I whispered, shrinking back into my chair. Olivia laughed, a sharp, ringing sound. Oh, for heaven's sake, Jamal, just tell her. She does not have the brain capacity to figure it out. Patricia set her martini glass down with a firm clink. She folded her manicured hands and fixed me with maternal disappointment. Natalie, stop looking like a terrified deer. Nobody hacked your bank accounts. There is no cybercriminal out to ruin your life. We took out the loan. And frankly, you should be thanking us on your hands and knees. I let my jaw drop open. I stared at my mother, projecting unadulterated shock. You stole my identity, I gasped, pressing hands to my mouth. You took out $400,000 in my name. We did not steal anything, Patricia snapped. Do not use such dramatic words. We repurposed a stagnant asset for the greater good of this family. You had a decent credit score, but you were never going to use it for anything meaningful. We utilized your credit to secure the capital Olivia desperately needed to open her second boutique location. You should be honored that your useless financial profile contributed to a success story. I shook my head frantically, letting my voice crack. Honored. You ruined my life. The loan is in default. The credit cards are maxed out. I am going to be arrested. Richard slammed his fist against the table, silencing my fake protests immediately. You are not going to be arrested, he barked, his face flushing red. And you are certainly not going to the police. If you even think about filing a police report against this family, I will personally ensure you are locked away in a psychiatric ward. I shrank back. Dad, please, I cried out softly. It is a federal crime. I have to tell them the truth. And what truth is that? Richard sneered. Who do you think the authorities are going to believe, Natalie, a wealthy logistics director, a successful bridal boutique owner, and a licensed investment broker? Or the deeply unstable, impoverished woman whose parents had to buy a full-page newspaper advertisement just to warn the community about her erratic behavior? He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing pitch. That newspaper article was an insurance policy. If you try to accuse us of fraud, I will hand that newspaper to the police chief. I will show them your miserable college transcripts and pathetic income. I will tell them you suffered a mental breakdown, maxed out your own credit cards in a manic episode, and are trying to frame your wealthy family out of pure jealousy. They will laugh you right out of the station. You have no credibility in this city. I made sure of it. The evil of his plan washed over me, but I maintained my facade of defeat. I looked at Jamal, letting my lower lip tremble. But the banks, I pleaded, my voice barely a whisper. How did you bypass the bank's security? They require signatures. They require verification for a loan of that size. Jamal leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers behind his head. He was vibrating with toxic pride. It was effortlessly simple, he bragged, unable to suppress his massive ego. You really are incredibly naive, Natalie. 3 years ago, when you came crying to me to fix your embarrassing tax returns, you signed a federal power of attorney form. You gave me legal authorization to act as your proxy. But that was just for the IRS, I whimpered, playing the clueless victim. It was only for my tax refund. Jamal rolled his eyes, smiling with malice. A signature is a signature, Natalie. Once I had your signature on file, I ported it over to a broader commercial proxy agreement. I walked into that mid-tier bank, flashed my credentials as a licensed broker, presented the power of attorney, and pledged your entire financial profile as the sole guarantor for elite bridal holdings. The bank executives barely blinked. They saw a high-value broker managing assets for a family member, and they rubber-stamped the $400,000 directly into our corporate accounts. What I did was perfectly legal, because you signed the gateway document. You handed me the keys to your kingdom. I walked through the door and took what this family needed. You cannot claim identity theft when you willingly gave me legal authority to represent you. You own the debt. We own the boutique. That is how the real world works. Olivia reached across the table and patted Jamal's arm affectionately. You see, Natalie, you are completely trapped. Jamal outsmarted you, and Dad made sure no one will ever believe a word you say. I looked at my lap, letting my hair fall forward to hide my face. I needed to conceal the predatory, victorious smile fighting to break across my lips. They had done it. They had completely admitted to the entire scheme. They believed their wealth and status made them invincible. They had absolutely no idea that every single word they proudly spoke was exactly what I needed to bury them in a federal penitentiary for a long time. I kept my head bowed, forcing a violent, shuddering breath through my chest to simulate a panic attack. I dug my fingernails into my palms until they stung, letting genuine physical discomfort produce a fresh layer of moisture in my eyes. When I finally looked up at them, I made sure my expression was the picture of utter defeat. The opulent private dining room felt like a coliseum, and my family sat in the royal box, eagerly watching the lions tear me to shreds. Okay, I whispered, my voice trembling so violently it cracked in the middle of the word. Okay, Jamal. You win. Dad wins. I will take the debt. I will take ownership of the $400,000 and the maxed-out credit cards. I just do not want to go to federal prison. I do not want my life to be completely destroyed over this. Patricia let out a long, highly satisfied exhale, taking a delicate sip of her gin martini. Finally, a breakthrough. It took a public intervention in the Sunday paper and a lot of tough love, but you are finally acting like an adult, taking responsibility for your miserable life. I was beginning to think you were completely incapable of feeling shame. I reached down into the cheap, scuffed canvas tote bag I had deliberately brought to this high-end steakhouse. My hands shook violently as I pulled out a thick stapled stack of papers. The document was dense with legal text formatted with standard financial tables, liability clauses, and signature lines on the final page. I slid it slowly across the pristine white tablecloth toward Jamal's side of the table, keeping my eyes wide and pleading. "What is this garbage?" Jamal demanded, eyeing the paperwork with intense distaste, as if it were physically contaminated. He did not reach for it immediately, treating it like a diseased object. "It is a debt acknowledgement and transfer schedule." I lied, my voice dripping with manufactured desperation. I was so terrified after the newspaper article that I went to a free legal aid clinic this morning. The counselor there told me that if I am going to consolidate $400,000 in commercial debt and officially assume the liability for Elite Bridal Holdings, I need a signed ledger from the current business managers. I need you and Olivia to sign it just to prove to the bank that I am taking over the repayment schedule. Otherwise, the bank will freeze everything and Olivia will lose the boutique. I looked at my sister, letting a heavy tear spill over my eyelashes and track down my cheek. "I will work 3 jobs, Olivia. I will work night shifts at a diner. I will scrub floors. I will do whatever it takes to pay off the boutique's commercial loan so you do not lose your store and your lifestyle. Just please sign the ledger so the bank knows I am assuming the total financial burden for you." Olivia scoffed, rolling her eyes as she reached for her glass of expensive wine. "You working 3 jobs? That is the funniest thing I have heard all night. You barely manage to balance a freelancer checkbook in that tiny apartment of yours. But if signing a piece of paper keeps the bank off my back while you slave away in a greasy diner kitchen for the next 30 years, fine. Hand me a pen. I have better things to do than worry about your repayment strategy." Jamal pulled the thick document toward himself, picking up a heavy gold-plated fountain pen from his inner suit pocket. His arrogance was a blinding, intoxicating drug. He saw a battered, weeping woman begging to take on $500,000 of his stolen debt. His colossal ego completely overrode any instinct for self-preservation or basic due diligence. He did not read the dense, single-spaced paragraphs detailing the exact flow of the stolen funds. He did not read the embedded clauses referencing federal banking statutes, offshore wire transfers, and identity theft. He only looked at the numbers, saw the $400,000 total, and saw my name listed as the primary payer. "A free legal aid clinic," Jamal sneered, shaking his head in absolute disgust as he flipped directly past the trap and went straight to the last page. "This formatting is pathetic, Natalie. But I suppose it is the best a broke bookkeeper can do. You are incredibly lucky I am even validating this amateur paperwork with my signature. You better not miss a single payment, or I will personally ensure the bank liquidates whatever miserable assets you have left." "I promise," I whimpered, clutching my hands tightly together against my chest. "Just sign it. Dad, please, you need to sign it too. As a witness to prove to the bank that the family is aware of the transfer and that the original loan was initiated under your guidance." Richard leaned forward, his face flushed with the triumph of totally dominating his disobedient daughter. "I will sign it," my father said, his voice hard and unforgiving. "But let this be a permanent lesson to you, Natalie. This is what happens when you refuse to respect your family. You spend the rest of your life paying for your mistakes." Jamal uncapped his gold pen and signed his name with a massive, arrogant flourish on the primary manager line. He shoved the document over to Olivia. She barely glanced at it, too busy checking her reflection in her phone screen, and scrawled her elegant, loopy signature right below her husband's. Finally, Richard snatched the paper, aggressively signing the witness and secondary guarantor line, permanently cementing his full knowledge and participation in the financial structuring of Elite Bridal Holdings. Patricia waved her hand dismissively from across the table. "Do not ask me to sign that trash. I do not do clerical work for bankrupt freelancers." That was perfectly fine. I had the 3 signatures I desperately needed, the holy trinity of financial fraud. I reached across the table and slowly pulled the document back toward me. My hands had completely stopped shaking. The manufactured tears in my eyes dried up instantly. I blew softly on the wet ink of Jamal's signature to ensure it would not smudge, then carefully slid the paperwork into a hard, secure leather folder I had hidden inside my tote bag. The transition in my demeanor was so sudden, so chillingly absolute, that Jamal frowned, his thick eyebrows pulling together in confusion. "What is wrong with your face?" he demanded, sensing the sudden absence of fear. I did not answer him. I simply looked down at the leather folder, feeling a surge of pure, unadulterated power coursing through my veins. They had not signed a simple debt transfer schedule from a free legal aid clinic. They had just signed a bespoke ironclad confession of fraud and federal promissory note. The document had been meticulously drafted by Harrison and the ruthless, high-powered corporate legal team at Apex Financial Forensics. By signing that paper, Jamal, Olivia, and Richard had legally verified their exact roles in the misappropriation of $400,000. They had verified in writing that the funds were used for elite bridal holdings and offshore cryptocurrency trading. They had formally confessed to utilizing my Social Security number without legal authorization. It was a federally recognized, legally binding death warrant. The trap had not just fully snapped shut, it had locked them inside a sealed concrete vault, and I was holding the only key. Their destruction was now completely guaranteed by their own arrogant hands. I walked into the glass-walled boardroom at Apex Financial Forensics. Harrison sat at the mahogany table with 3 litigators. I placed the leather folder in the center. I slid the signed promissory note to the lead attorney, Brenda. She read it in silence. "Did the bait work?" Harrison asked. I smiled. They practically ripped the pen from my hand. Jamal, Olivia, and my father signed, guaranteeing the debt and acknowledging the flow of $400,000 into elite bridal holdings. They admitted to utilizing my Social Security number, committing identity theft. Brenda looked up. "I have never seen criminals willingly sign a confession of fraud because their ego demanded it. You structured this perfectly, Natalie. By signing this document, Jamal handed the federal government a wrapped gift box containing aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, and bank fraud. Let us break down the exact exposure Harrison instructed, activating the smartboard behind him. Jamal committed aggravated identity theft under Title 18, Section 1028A. By using your identifier to secure a commercial line of credit and draining funds offshore, he triggers mandatory consecutive sentencing. Bank and wire fraud carry maximum penalties of 30 and 20 years. The FBI has federal jurisdiction. Jamal faces a guaranteed minimum of 15 years with no early parole." "And Olivia?" I asked. "Olivia is equally liable," Brenda confirmed. She signed as Keogh Managing Director. Ignorance is no defense when she actively signed this document acknowledging the capital origin. She is complicit in laundering stolen funds. The federal government will seize her boutique, freeze her personal assets, and she will likely serve 5 to 10 years as a co-conspirator. I leaned back in my chair. The realization that I was about to completely dismantle their lives was intoxicating. Harrison smiled grimly, reaching across the table to pick up the Sunday edition of the Local Observer. "This brings us to the most poetic twist of this entire investigation. Your father, Richard, decided to pay for a full-page newspaper advertisement to display your doctored pay stub and ruined credit score. But he did not stop there. He proudly confessed at the country club that he bought 100 physical copies of this newspaper and used the United States Postal Service to mail them to your relatives across state lines and directly to this corporate office." Brenda turned to face me. "That action right there is the golden ticket, Natalie. Under Title 18, United States Code Section 1341, utilizing the postal system to distribute fraudulent altered financial documents with the intent to harm, defame, or further a fraudulent scheme constitutes mail fraud." "Mail fraud," I repeated, letting the devastating words roll off my tongue. "Exactly," Harrison said, his voice echoing in the glass room. "Your father thought he was executing a brilliant public shaming. He thought he was untouchable because he is a wealthy logistics director. But the moment he put a stamp on an envelope containing a digitally forged pay stub and a credit report generated by his son-in-law's identity theft, he committed a severe federal offense. Each piece of mail he sent is a separate count of mail fraud. He confessed to mailing 100 copies. That is 100 individual counts of a federal crime. Brenda nodded in agreement. The maximum penalty for a single count of mail fraud is 20 years in federal prison. Your father just handed the United States Attorney General a slam-dunk indictment. Furthermore, because your father signed the promissory note as a witness and secondary guarantor, he formally linked his public defamation campaign directly to the underlying bank fraud. It establishes a coordinated multi-generational criminal conspiracy. They did not just steal your money, Natalie. They formed an organized syndicate to destroy your life and cover their tracks. The silence in the boardroom was heavy thick with the impending ruin of the people who had terrorized me for 33 years. I looked at the red ink detailing the decades of prison time hanging over their heads. They had spent my entire life calling me a failure. They had mocked my career, belittled my apartment, and treated my existence as a shameful stain on their perfect country club legacy. Now I was holding the absolute power to erase them from society. "What is our next move?" Harrison asked, watching me closely to ensure I possessed the killer instinct required for the final blow. I stood up from the mahogany table, snapping my briefcase shut. "We do not go to the local police," I stated firmly. "Local cops will get bogged down in family drama and civil court delays. We take this dossier directly to the top. I want you to connect me with your liaisons at the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division and the Federal Bureau of Investigation White-Collar Crimes Unit." Brenda smiled a fierce, predatory look. "I have the regional director of the FBI field office on speed dial. We can have this entire package on his desk by noon today. Once the feds see the offshore crypto wires combined with the mail fraud, they will secure federal indictments by the end of the week." "Do it," I commanded. "Hand over every single receipt." I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window looking out over the sprawling sunlit city. Somewhere down there, Jamal was bragging about his stock portfolio. Olivia was adjusting custom silk gowns in a boutique built on stolen blood. And my parents were sipping mimosas, congratulating themselves on finally putting the family failure in her place. They believed they had finally won. They were completely unaware that the federal hammer was already swinging down to crush their world into dust. This was not just about revenge anymore. It was about pure, undeniable justice. I was going to watch them lose absolutely everything, knowing they had dug their own graves. The execution of their fraudulent empire would begin tonight, and I would not ever blink once. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Harrison and I were walking through the heavy steel doors of the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office. The atmosphere inside the building was a stark contrast to the plush, arrogant luxury of the Oak Ridge Country Club. There were no crystal chandeliers or mimosas here. The air smelled of ozone-filtered air conditioning and stale coffee. We were escorted past 2 biometric security checkpoints and led deep into the white-collar crime division. We entered a windowless briefing room equipped with multiple secure terminals and frosted glass walls. Waiting for us at the stainless steel table were 2 people who possessed the absolute authority to dismantle my family. Special Agent Reynolds represented the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. Sitting beside him was Inspector Foster, a veteran investigator from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. Both agents wore severe dark suits and expressions devoid of any amusement. They did not care about family drama or country club gossip. They only cared about federal statutes and paper trails. Harrison and I took our seats. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I opened my briefcase and placed the thick black leather dossier dead center on the steel table. "This is a complete forensic audit mapping $400,000 in commercial bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, and 100 counts of mail fraud," I stated, sliding the first stack of documents toward Agent Reynolds. "The primary perpetrators are my brother-in-law Jamal and my sister Olivia. The secondary guarantor and mail fraud suspect is my father Richard. I have provided the forged power of attorney, the offshore cryptocurrency wire transfers, and a legally binding promissory note containing their verified signatures admitting to the debt. Agent Reynolds opened the dossier. The room fell entirely silent except for the crisp sound of pages turning. Inspector Foster pulled the tax documents toward herself, adjusting her glasses. For 10 agonizingly tense minutes, the two federal agents scrutinized the evidence I had compiled. As a forensic auditor, I knew exactly how to format a criminal referral. I had highlighted the exact statutes violated, provided the routing numbers for every single illicit transaction, and mapped the flow of stolen capital directly into elite bridal holdings. Inspector Foster looked up first. Her eyes were sharp and calculating. You tracked the initial capital injection directly from the compromised commercial loan into the bridal checking account, and then mapped the subsequent dispersion to offshore crypto exchanges. This is exceptionally clean work, Natalie. You handed us the entire money laundering pipeline on a silver platter. Agent Reynolds tapped the signed promissory note. And they actually signed a confession of fraud because you convinced them they were trapping you with the debt. That is a level of hubris I rarely see outside of organized crime syndicates. He turned to his secure terminal and began typing rapidly. Let us pull Jamal and his brokerage license. If he is brazen enough to execute identity theft against a family member using a forged federal tax document, this is likely not his first foray into financial misconduct. We watched the screen mirror on the wall display. Agent Reynolds bypassed the public registry and accessed the secure Financial Industry Regulatory Authority database. He cross-referenced Jamal against Internal Securities and Exchange Commission watch lists. A cascade of restricted files populated the screen. The reality of Jamal was far worse than simply being an arrogant, over-leveraged broker. Look at this, Agent Reynolds said, highlighting a series of sealed complaints. Jamal has 3 separate internal investigations flagged at his current brokerage firm. 2 years ago, he was quietly investigated for churning client accounts, executing unauthorized trades to generate artificial commissions. Last year, a high-net-worth client accused him of embezzling $75,000. The firm settled the matter privately out of court to avoid a public scandal, and Jamal was placed on a restrictive probationary status. He was drowning, I realized, the final puzzle piece snapping firmly into place. He did not just steal my identity to fund Olivia and her lavish boutique. He stole it because his brokerage firm had cut off his access to easy money. He needed a massive influx of capital to cover his gambling losses and maintain his wealthy alpha male persona. I was his emergency bailout. Inspector Foster began typing on her own terminal linking directly to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. He is currently attempting to move the remaining digital assets off ledger, she warned, pointing to a real-time blockchain analysis pinging on her screen. Jamal realizes the cryptocurrency markets are dipping. He is trying to funnel the remaining liquidity through a decentralized mixer to hide the capital offshore. If he moves that money out of federal jurisdiction, recovering it will take years of international litigation. We cannot let that happen, Harrison interjected smoothly. The moment he successfully hides those assets, he will likely attempt to file bankruptcy for the boutique and leave Natalie holding the bag. We are not going to let him move a single dime, Agent Reynolds stated, standing up from the table. The evidence you provided is more than sufficient to establish probable cause for immediate federal intervention. Foster, I need you to draft the asset freeze authorizations right now. Contact the commercial bank and execute a lock on all accounts tied to Elite Bridal Holdings. I am going to the federal magistrate to get the arrest warrants signed. Inspector Foster nodded, her fingers flying across the keyboard to draft the emergency injunctions. We will place a hard freeze on his domestic brokerage accounts and issue a federal seizure warrant for the cryptocurrency wallets. By the time he tries to log in, his entire financial existence will be locked behind a government firewall. Agent Reynolds looked at me, his expression deadly serious. We need to execute these warrants simultaneously. If we arrest Jamal at his office, he might manage to send a warning text to Olivia or Richard. If they catch wind of the raid, they will destroy documents at the boutique or attempt to flee. We need to apprehend all three of them at the exact same time in a location where we can control the environment and seize their mobile devices before they can delete any digital evidence. I smiled, a cold and calculating expression spreading across my face. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out the thick gold-foiled envelope I had received in the mail yesterday. I slid it across the stainless steel table toward Agent Reynolds. "You will not have to hunt them down," I said smoothly. "They are hosting a massive grand opening gala for the second boutique location this coming Saturday night. The event is doubling as my parents' 40th anniversary party. The entire family will be there alongside half the country club and local society reporters. They are gathering in one room to celebrate an empire built entirely on federal fraud." Agent Reynolds looked at the gold-foiled invitation, a slow, predatory smile matching my own. "Saturday night," he confirmed. "We will have the tactical teams ready." The gold-foiled envelope resting on the stainless steel table in the federal building was only the physical manifestation of their profound arrogance. The true psychological warfare had been playing out on my personal phone for the past 48 hours. As Agent Reynolds and Inspector Foster formalized the tactical raid parameters, my screen lit up with yet another notification. It was a text message from my mother, Patricia, followed immediately by an audio voicemail. I did not silence the device. Instead, I unlocked the screen and played the audio file out loud in the secure briefing room, letting the federal agents hear exactly what kind of people we were about to dismantle. Patricia's voice echoed off the frosted glass walls, dripping with manufactured condescension and toxic superiority. "Natalie, I am leaving this message because you have not responded to the formal invitation Olivia sent you. We are hosting the grand opening for the second boutique location this Saturday night, which you already know coincides perfectly with my 40th wedding anniversary to your father. It is going to be the social event of the season. The mayor will be there. The country club board of directors will be there. Jamal has invited his most elite investment clients. I expect you to attend. Not as a guest, obviously, given your embarrassing financial state, but we are short-staffed on the catering crew. You can wear a plain black dress, stay in the background, and serve drinks. It will give you a chance to see what real success looks like. Maybe some of Jamal and Olivia's work ethic will finally rub off on you. Do not humiliate us by hiding in your apartment. Show up and make yourself useful for once." The voicemail ended with a sharp click. The silence in the FBI briefing room was absolute. Harrison crossed his arms, his jaw clenched in professional disgust. Agent Reynolds shook his head, staring at the digital audio file on my screen. "They genuinely believe you are completely broken," Agent Reynolds stated, a note of sheer disbelief in his voice. "They stole $400,000 from your identity, ruined your shadow credit profile, and now they want you to serve champagne to the very people they are defrauding. The psychological manipulation is staggering. It is their standard operational procedure," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. "They need me there to serve as a visual contrast to their fabricated wealth. They need the scapegoat to stand in the corner so the golden child shines brighter. They want to parade their stolen empire right in front of my face, fully believing I am too incompetent to understand that I actually paid for the entire venue." My phone buzzed again. This time it was a direct text message from Olivia. The message read, "Make sure you use the service entrance in the back alley. I do not want your beat-up sedan parked anywhere near the valet line. Jamal hired a professional photographer, and we need the aesthetic to remain pristine. Do not be late." I typed my response with deliberate, measured keystrokes. I did not express anger. I did not threaten them or hint at the impending destruction. I simply typed, "I understand completely. I wouldn't miss it for the world." I hit send, locking in my attendants and sealing their fate. Inspector Foster pulled up the structural blueprints for the boutique's second location on the main monitor. "Let us finalize the operational timeline," she instructed, her tone shifting entirely to tactical execution. "The event begins at 7 o'clock in the evening. The venue features a primary showroom, a VIP champagne lounge in the rear, and a private loading dock. We will position plainclothes agents in the valet area by 6:30 to secure the perimeter and monitor all incoming luxury vehicles. We need to ensure Jamal does not attempt to leave the premises once the party is underway. Agent Reynolds traced the egress routes on the digital blueprint. We will execute the primary breach at exactly 8:30. By that time, the venue will be at maximum capacity and the primary targets will be fully engaged with their audience. I will coordinate a synchronized lockdown of all domestic bank accounts and cryptocurrency portfolios at 8:15. When we walk through those front doors, Jamal will already possess a net worth of absolute zero. I want to be inside the venue before the breach, I stated, looking directly at the federal agents. I will comply with my mother's demand and arrive early. I need to be in the room to maintain their false sense of security. If I do not show up, Patricia might complain loudly enough to cause a scene, or Jamal might get suspicious and check his offshore accounts early. My presence guarantees they remain entirely distracted by their own egos. Harrison nodded in agreement. Natalie is right. Her attendance is the ultimate misdirection. They will be so focused on mocking her that they will never notice the federal surveillance vehicles staging in the back alley. Agreed. Agent Reynolds confirmed, finalizing the operational ledger. You maintain visual contact with the primary targets. When you see the tactical teams enter the main lobby, you step back and let the federal badges do the talking. We handle the arrests. You simply watch the house of cards collapse. Over the next 48 hours, the anticipation was a slow, burning adrenaline rush. I returned to my luxury apartment and opened my closet. My mother had explicitly demanded I wear a plain black dress to blend in with the catering staff. I had absolutely no intention of honoring that request. I bypassed the casual attire and selected a custom-tailored, razor-sharp ivory power suit. It was a garment designed for corporate warfare, projecting absolute authority and financial dominance. I paired it with stilettos and minimalist gold jewelry. I was not going to a family anniversary party. I was attending a financial execution. My phone continued to receive a steady stream of toxic reminders from my family. Richard texted to ensure I had ironed my clothes properly so I would not embarrass them in front of the catering manager. Jamal sent a sarcastic message asking if I needed an advance on my serving tips to pay my electric bill. I read every single message, archiving them into the legal evidence file. Each insult was another layer of concrete poured over their impending federal sentences. Friday evening, Harrison called me on his secure corporate line. The asset freeze warrants have been signed by the federal magistrate. He confirmed, his voice vibrating with professional satisfaction. The FBI has secured the perimeter assignments. The IRS has positioned the seizure notices for the boutique's inventory. We are locked and loaded for tomorrow night. Thank you, Harrison, I replied, looking at my reflection in the hallway mirror. Get some sleep, Natalie. Tomorrow you are going to dismantle an empire. I hung up the phone and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city skyline. Somewhere across town, Olivia was admiring her stolen crystal chandeliers. Jamal was practicing his arrogant speeches about market leverage. Patricia and Richard were polishing their fake personas for the country club elite. They were sleeping soundly, completely oblivious to the fact that Saturday would be their final day of freedom. I turned away from the window, feeling a profound, chilling sense of peace. The storm was coming, and I was holding the lightning. Saturday evening descended on the city with a crisp, electric energy. I pulled my vehicle into the parking structure 2 blocks away from the venue, bypassing the velvet-roped valet line entirely. I walked the remaining distance, my heels clicking a steady rhythmic countdown against the pavement. The second location of Elite Bridal Holdings occupied a massive, newly renovated corner property in the absolute center of the historic Arts District. As I approached the towering double-glass doors, the sheer scale of their financial audacity became glaringly apparent. They had transformed the commercial space into a palace of stolen wealth. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I observed the grotesque display of my ruined shadow credit. 2 massive hand-carved swans, sculpted entirely from ice, flanked the entrance, glistening under the tactical glow of colored spotlights. A towering 7-tier champagne fountain dominated the center of the main showroom floor, bubbling with imported French vintage that cost more per bottle than my monthly grocery budget. The room was packed shoulder to shoulder with the city's social elite. Local politicians, country club board members, and wealthy socialites mingled amidst racks of imported silk and lace. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated with silver trays of caviar and truffle hors d'oeuvres. It was a masterclass in aggressive, fraudulent opulence. Every single crystal chandelier hanging from the vaulted ceiling, every slab of imported Italian marble on the floors, and every drop of premium liquor in those glasses had been purchased with the $400,000 commercial loan chained to my Social Security number. They were throwing the party of the decade, and I was the unwitting, involuntary sponsor. I did not walk around to the back alley service entrance as my sister had explicitly demanded. I did not wear a cheap plain black dress to blend in with the hired catering staff. I bypassed the overwhelmed security guard at the front door, slipping smoothly into the main lobby. I was wearing my custom-tailored razor-sharp ivory power suit. The cut of the fabric was immaculate, projecting an aura of high-level corporate authority that immediately set me apart from the sea of cocktail dresses and tuxedo jackets. I wore a bold emerald silk blouse underneath, paired with gold geometric earrings and stiletto heels that elevated my posture to absolute dominance. I looked exactly like what I was, a senior partner at a premier forensic auditing firm stepping onto a crime scene. My entrance caused an immediate visible ripple in the immediate vicinity. Several wealthy clients of Jamal turned to look at me, their conversations pausing as they took in my unapologetic, commanding presence. I did not shrink away from their stares. I walked directly toward the towering champagne fountain, plucked a crystal flute from the edge of the cascading pyramid, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The vintage was excellent. It should be, considering I was technically paying the interest on the credit card used to buy it. It took less than 45 seconds for the golden child to spot the disruption. Olivia was holding court near a display of custom diamond tiaras, wearing a shimmering, heavily beaded silver evening gown that screamed of newly acquired wealth. Her eyes locked onto my ivory suit, and her perfectly contoured face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She whispered something urgently to Jamal, who was standing beside her holding a scotch glass and laughing loudly with a local real estate developer. Jamal turned his head, his arrogant smile vanishing instantly when he saw me standing by the champagne fountain. He muttered an excuse to his client and immediately began marching across the marble floor toward me, with Olivia trailing closely behind his broad shoulders. They moved with the aggressive, panicked energy of people who suddenly realized their favorite punching bag had completely ignored the script. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" Jamal hissed, his voice dropping to a harsh, threatening whisper as he stepped directly into my personal space. He attempted to use his height to physically intimidate me, positioning his broad frame to block me from the view of the nearby socialites. "You were specifically instructed to use the loading dock entrance. You are completely out of uniform. You look like you are trying to crash a corporate board meeting." Olivia stepped out from behind him, her eyes scanning my tailored suit with frantic, toxic vanity. "Are you literally insane, Natalie?" she demanded, her manicured fingers gripping the stem of her wine glass so tightly, her knuckles turned white. "I told you to wear a plain black shift dress and stay in the background. You look like a ridiculous imposter. You are embarrassing me in front of the mayor. I need you to go to the catering kitchen right now, take off that pathetic blazer, and start passing out the crab cakes before my investors see you." I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I held my champagne flute at chest level, looking back and forth between their furious, panicked faces. The absolute irony of them calling me an imposter while standing in a building funded by federal identity theft was almost too poetic to bear. "I am not here to serve your crab cakes, Olivia," I replied. My voice perfectly modulated, chillingly calm and loud enough for the two closest guests to hear clearly. "I am simply here to admire the incredible return on investment you have managed to squeeze out of my financial profile. The ice swans are a brilliant touch. Really screams fiscal responsibility. Jamal leaned down, his voice laced with pure venom. You are going to walk out those front doors and disappear before I have security throw you out. I took a slow sip of my champagne, checked my designer watch, noting the exact minute, and smiled very coldly right at him, knowing the federal raid was imminent. He possessed absolutely no idea what was coming next. Before Jamal could summon another threat, a sharp ringing sound cut through the ambient jazz and cocktail chatter. The heavy silver spoon tapping against a crystal champagne flute commanded the immediate attention of every local politician, socialite, and country club board member in the room. I remained exactly where I was, my posture relaxed, but completely anchored as all eyes shifted toward the grand sweeping staircase at the back of the boutique. My mother, Patricia, stood on the landing. She was draped in a custom emerald gown that pooled around her feet, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. She looked like the queen of a fabricated empire, soaking in the absolute adoration of the wealthy crowd. My father, Richard, stood one step below her, wearing a bespoke tuxedo and looking up at his wife with manufactured devotion. Patricia waited until the room fell into complete silence. She lifted the microphone, projecting her voice with the polished grace of a seasoned social climber. I watched closely as Patricia took a deep breath and addressed the crowd. Thank you, everyone, Patricia began, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Thank you for joining us on this truly magnificent evening. Tonight is a celebration of two incredible milestones. First, Richard and I are celebrating 40 years of marriage. 40 years of building a legacy founded on hard work, integrity, and uncompromising family values. A polite, enthusiastic wave of applause rippled through the attentive audience. But tonight is not just about our past, Patricia continued, gesturing grandly toward the main floor. Tonight is about the future. It is about the phenomenal success of the next generation. Look around you. Look at this breathtaking second location of Elite Bridal Holdings. This expansion is the direct result of the sheer brilliance and unrelenting ambition of my beautiful daughter, Olivia. Olivia did not ask for handouts. She built this business from the ground up. She is the definition of a self-made woman. And of course, she could not have scaled this mountain without the financial genius of her husband, Jamal. Patricia pointed to him, her voice swelling with pride. Jamal is a titan in the investment world. He understands capital. He understands growth. Together, Jamal and Olivia have proven that with the right mindset and the right breeding, the sky is truly the limit. They are the absolute pride of the family name. Jamal was a degenerate gambler facing federal indictment. Olivia was a puppet playing dress-up with stolen credit. And my mother was the loudest cheerleader for a criminal syndicate. Patricia turned her gaze back to the crowd, preparing to deliver her closing remarks. As her eyes swept across the room, they locked onto me. She had not seen me enter. She had completely expected me to be cowering by the dingy service elevator in a cheap black dress, quietly passing out hot appetizers. Instead, she saw me standing near the ice sculptures in an immaculate ivory power suit, radiating absolute authority. Her smile faltered. Her grip on the microphone tightened. I could see the wheels turning in her head as she realized I had deliberately defied her orders and positioned myself in plain sight of her wealthy friends. But Patricia never missed an opportunity to play the martyr. She quickly recovered her composure, her expression morphing into a mask of profound, tragic pity. She lowered her voice, adopting a tone of sorrowful maternal grace. Of course, building a family legacy is never without its deep heartbreaks, Patricia said, looking directly at me. The crowd followed her gaze, turning to stare at the woman in the ivory suit. As parents, we pour our entire souls into our children. We try to guide them toward success. But sometimes, despite our absolute best efforts and our endless financial support, a child simply loses their way. They stumble, they fail to launch, they make choices that bring them to the brink of ruin. The heavy silence in the entire room became incredibly thick and deeply uncomfortable. Patricia placed a hand over her heart, looking at me with toxic, weaponized sympathy. But that is the true test of family, is it not? We must find the grace to love even the children who fail us. We must keep our doors open to those who squander their potential even when they refuse to help themselves. We love you, Natalie, despite everything you have failed to become. A collective murmur of pity swept through the audience. It was the absolute peak of psychological manipulation. They had fallen perfectly into the trap. I did not break eye contact with Patricia. I did not blush or look away. I simply raised my crystal flute in a silent, mocking toast. Across the room, my father's face hardened into a mask of pure rage. My refusal to look ashamed infuriated him. Richard discreetly stepped off the staircase and gestured to two burly private security guards stationed near the velvet ropes. He pointed sharply at me, then motioned toward the back exit. He wanted me ejected before the photographer began taking the official family portraits. He wanted the visual stain removed from his perfect evening. The two security guards nodded and began pushing their way through the crowd, flanking me from both sides. They moved with quiet, aggressive purpose, aiming to grab my elbows and force me out the service doors before anyone realized what was happening. Richard crossed his arms, watching them approach me with a satisfied, malicious smirk. I did not run. I did not step back. I placed my empty champagne flute on a passing waiter's silver tray. I checked my designer watch one final time. It was exactly 8:29 in the evening. The federal raid was scheduled for 8:30. The security guards were only 5 feet away from me, reaching their hands out to grab my shoulders. I smiled coldly at my father, maintaining my perfect posture. His perfect stolen world was about to end entirely. Before the security guards could touch my ivory blazer, I raised my right hand in a sharp, authoritative gesture. "Stand down!" I commanded, my voice projecting with the absolute certainty of a corporate executive directing entire departments. The two burly security men hesitated, freezing in their tracks. They were hired muscle accustomed to dealing with unruly drunks. They were completely unprepared for a woman who looked and acted like she owned the building. I did not give them time to recover. I stepped effortlessly between them and marched directly toward the grand sweeping staircase. Richard lunged forward to block my path, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "Security, grab her right now!" he bellowed, losing his polished country club demeanor. I sidestepped him with practiced elegance, brushing past his tuxedo. I ascended the carpeted stairs with rapid, deliberate strides. Patricia was still standing on the landing, her emerald gown shimmering under the chandeliers. Her eyes widened in genuine panic as I approached her right now. She clutched the wireless microphone to her chest, taking a small step backward. She expected me to scream, to cry, to beg for validation in front of her wealthy friends. Instead, I reached out and firmly gripped the microphone. Patricia was so paralyzed by shock that her fingers simply uncurled. I slipped the device smoothly from her hands, turning to face the sea of astonished faces gathered on the main showroom floor. The background jazz music was still playing softly, providing a surreal soundtrack to the impending execution. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice echoing crystal clear across the sprawling venue. "I apologize for interrupting the schedule, but since my mother was so eager to discuss my career trajectory, I felt it was only appropriate to introduce myself properly." I looked down at the crowd. The local politicians, the country club board members, and the elite socialites were all staring up at me in absolute silence. I spotted Jamal pushing his way through the crowd, his face pale and contorted with panic. Olivia stood frozen next to the champagne fountain, looking like a deer caught in the headlights. "My mother just told you that I am a struggling freelancer." I continued, pacing slowly across the landing. "She bought a full-page advertisement in the Sunday paper to warn this community about my supposed financial ruin." However, Patricia failed to update her records. "My name is Natalie, and I am not a freelance bookkeeper. I am a senior partner and lead forensic auditor at Apex Financial Forensics. I specialize in unmasking corporate embezzlement, tracking offshore money laundering, and dismantling federal identity theft operations." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The wealthy guests exchanged bewildered glances. The narrative Patricia had sold them was completely unraveling in real time. "And as a forensic auditor," I projected, my voice louder, cutting through the rising murmurs. I have a professional obligation to trace illicit capital. So let us talk about the breathtaking success of Elite Bridal Holdings. Let us talk about how my brilliant brother-in-law Jamal and my beautiful sister Olivia built this magnificent second location without asking for any handouts. Jamal finally reached the bottom of the staircase. "Cut the microphone!" he screamed at the audio technician stationed near the back wall. "She is having a psychotic break. Cut the sound right now." The technician looked completely terrified and did not touch the mixing board. "Jamal is yelling because he knows exactly what I found," I said, pointing directly at him. "He knows I traced the $400,000 commercial loan he fraudulently secured using my social security number. He forged a federal power of attorney to bypass the bank security protocols. He pledged my pristine financial profile as the sole guarantor to bail out Olivia's failing business." The shock in the room escalated into loud, horrified whispers. Several prominent investors who had been chatting with Jamal just minutes ago physically backed away from him. I gestured expansively around the opulent room. "Take a good look at the luxury surrounding you tonight. Those massive hand-carved ice swans flanking the entrance, paid for by identity theft. This imported Italian marble flooring, financed by bank fraud. The vintage champagne currently sitting in your crystal flutes purchased, using elite black credit cards opened illegally in my name. This entire gala is not a celebration of entrepreneurial success. It is a crime scene funded entirely by my stolen identity." "Liar!" Patricia shrieked, her voice cracking as she lunged toward me, desperately trying to snatch the microphone back. "You are insane! You are a jealous, psychotic liar! Someone call the police!" I easily sidestepped her frantic grab, maintaining my calm, commanding posture. "I already did, Mom," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous, chilling pitch that the microphone picked up perfectly. "In fact, you made it incredibly easy for them. Do you remember the legal document you, Richard, Olivia, and Jamal eagerly signed at the steakhouse? The one you thought was transferring the debt to me? That was a federally recognized promissory note drafted by corporate litigators. You legally confessed in ink to utilizing my identity and laundering the stolen funds." Olivia let out a high-pitched wail, dropping her champagne flute. The crystal shattered against the stolen marble floor. "You are having a mental breakdown!" Patricia screamed, her emerald gown shaking as she pointed a trembling finger at me. "You are completely delusional. None of this is real. You are making this up because you hate us." "I am not insane, Patricia," I said, looking at my designer watch. The digital face read exactly 8:30. "I am just exceptionally good at my own job." I raised my hand and pointed straight past the terrified crowd, directing the attention of every single guest toward the towering double-glass doors at the back of the venue. "And right on schedule," I announced, my voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. "Here is the brutal reality check." And right on schedule, I announced, my voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. "Here is the brutal reality check." The heavy double-glass doors at the main entrance did not simply open. They were violently thrust apart. The deafening crash of the doors striking the interior walls echoed like a gunshot through the opulent showroom. A flood of men and women wearing dark, tactical windbreakers surged into the boutique. The bold yellow letters printed across their backs read, "FBI and I.R.S. Criminal Investigation." They moved with terrifying synchronized precision, fanning out across the imported Italian marble floor to secure every possible exit. The soft, elegant jazz music that had been playing over the hidden sound system was abruptly severed, replaced by the sharp, booming commands of federal agents securing a live crime scene. "Federal agents, nobody move! Keep your hands where we can see them!" A commanding voice barked over a bullhorn. The transformation of the room was instantaneous, catastrophic. The sophisticated chatter of the city elite dissolved into a chaotic chorus of gasps, shrieks, and shattering crystal. Wealthy socialites stumbled backward, their designer heels slipping on the spilled vintage champagne that now pooled around the base of the towering fountain. A prominent local politician actually ducked behind a velvet display mannequin, his face completely drained of color. The country club board members who just moments ago had been toasting to my family, fabricated legacy, now clustered together in terrified, bewildered herds, desperately trying to distance themselves from the epicenter of the raid. I stood on the grand staircase, looking down at the absolute pandemonium I had orchestrated. Olivia was frozen beside the ice swans, her shimmering silver evening gown suddenly looking like a cheap costume. She let out a guttural, panicked sob, her hands flying to her mouth, as two stern-faced female IRS agents marched directly toward the custom marble reception desk. They carried heavy plastic evidence bins and stacks of bright red federal seizure notices. Olivia watched in sheer horror as one of the agents slapped a massive seizure sticker right over the brass plaque that bore my name. Across the room, Jamal's arrogant alpha male facade completely evaporated. The swaggering investment broker who had ruthlessly mocked my credit score was now trembling like a cornered rat. His eyes darted wildly toward the VIP champagne lounge in the rear, calculating the distance to the service exit. He actually took 2 rapid steps backward, abandoning his wealthy clients preparing to bolt. "Do not even think about it, Jamal," a voice boomed from the front. Agent Reynolds stepped through the parted crowd, his badge prominently displayed on his belt, his posture radiating absolute lethal authority. 2 heavily armed tactical agents immediately flanked Jamal, cutting off his escape route. Jamal raised his hands, his custom-tailored suit suddenly looking completely ridiculous on a man about to lose his entire freedom. Agent Reynolds did not waste a single second. He strode directly to the base of the grand staircase, his eyes briefly meeting mine in a silent nod of professional acknowledgement. He reached out and I handed him the wireless microphone. The feedback whined sharply for a fraction of a second before his booming voice commanded the complete attention of every terrified guest in the building. "Ladies and gentlemen," Agent Reynolds announced, his tone clinical and completely devoid of sympathy. "This property is now under the operational control of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service. We are executing a federal seizure warrant on this premises and all associated corporate entities." A collective gasp of horror rose from the elite crowd. Patricia clutched the banister of the staircase, her emerald gown trembling as her knees threatened to buckle. Richard stood paralyzed, his mouth hanging open in silent, suffocating disbelief. Effective immediately, Agent Reynolds continued reading from a thick legal document he pulled from his jacket. "All physical inventory, real estate holdings and liquid assets tied to Elite Bridal Holdings, LLC, are frozen and seized by the United States government. This includes the merchandise, the fixtures, and every piece of imported decor in this room. The corporate accounts have been locked. The offshore cryptocurrency wallets utilized by the managing directors have been intercepted and frozen under federal mandate. The social execution was swift and absolutely brutal. The elite guests, the very people my parents had spent 40 years desperately trying to impress, began to aggressively turn on them." I watched as the president of the local country club glared up at Richard, his face twisted in profound disgust. "You invited us to a money laundering operation." The club president spat his voice, carrying clearly in the dead silence of the room. "You paraded us around a criminal enterprise funded by identity theft. You are an absolute disgrace, Richard." The wealthy wives who had been fawning over Olivia bridal designs just 20 minutes ago now looked at her as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. They dropped the silk veils they had been admiring physically, wiping their hands on their expensive dresses as they backed away from the display racks. The illusion of the perfect, affluent family was completely shattered, exposing the rotten, fraudulent core underneath. They were no longer the envy of the city. They were a ring of federal criminals exposed in front of the exact audience they worshipped most. Patricia let out a high-pitched, hysterical wail. "This is a mistake," she screamed. her voice cracking wildly as she gripped the banister. "We are respectable people. My son-in-law is a licensed broker. You are ruining our anniversary." "Agent." Reynolds looked up at my mother, his expression entirely unimpressed. "Your son-in-law is an embezzler, ma'am, and you are standing in a building financed by federal wire fraud. There is no mistake." I stood on the landing, my ivory power suit completely unwrinkled. The panic in the room was a perfect symphony. They were losing absolutely everything right here with no mercy. Jamal finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. The reality of a 15-year federal sentence crashing down on his arrogant shoulders triggered a desperate, animalistic instinct to flee. He looked at the two heavily armed tactical agents flanking him, then looked toward the velvet curtain hiding the VIP champagne lounge. He thought he was faster. He thought he could outrun the United States government. Jamal shoved a wealthy local politician directly into a towering floral arrangement, using the man as a human shield, and bolted for the rear exit. He did not make it 5 feet. The tactical response was instantaneous and breathtakingly violent. The two FBI agents surged forward. One of them grabbed the collar of Jamal's custom navy blue suit, while the other executed a flawless tactical sweep of his legs. Jamal flew through the air, his arms flailing wildly. He crashed face first into a pristine illuminated glass display case holding a $20,000 custom bridal veil. The thick glass shattered into thousands of jagged pieces raining down over his expensive clothing. The impact echoed over the screams of the terrified socialites. Before Jamal could even attempt to push himself up from the ruined merchandise, an agent drove a knee sharply between his shoulder blades, pinning him flat against the floor. "Stop resisting!" the agent roared, twisting Jamal's arms forcefully behind his back. The distinct sharp click of heavy steel handcuffs locking into place was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The arrogant investment broker who had ruthlessly mocked my credit score was now bleeding from a small cut on his cheek, groveling in shattered glass, and completely restrained. Watching her husband get tackled and handcuffed absolutely broke Olivia. The facade of the self-made entrepreneurial boss completely evaporated. She dropped her designer clutch, the expensive leather slapping against the wet marble floor. She let out a guttural, hyperventilating shriek that pierced the heavy tension of the room. Olivia dropped entirely to her knees, disregarding her shimmering silver evening gown as it soaked up the spilled vintage champagne. "Jamal," she screamed, her voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched wail. "Mom, Dad, do something. They are hurting him. Tell them to stop. Do something right now." She clawed at the air, her perfectly contoured makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks of mascara. The local elites she had spent months trying to impress were now actively pointing their phones at her, recording her spectacular downfall. Olivia buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably on the ruined floor of her seized empire. My father Richard finally snapped out of his catatonic shock. His lifetime of wealthy suburban privilege blinded him to the reality of the situation. He genuinely believed that his money and his country club connections made him immune to federal law enforcement. He puffed out his chest, his face flushing a deep, dangerous purple, and marched aggressively toward Agent Reynolds. "This is an absolute outrage," Richard bellowed, jabbing a thick finger directly at the federal agent. "You have no right to barge into a private event and assault my son-in-law. I know the mayor of this city. I play golf with the district attorney. I am going to sue the Federal Bureau of Investigation for everything you have. I am going to have your badge by tomorrow morning. I demand my lawyers right now. You are all trespassing on my daughter's property." Agent Reynolds did not even blink. He looked at my father with the bored, clinical exhaustion of a man who dealt with delusional, white-collar criminals every single day. "You do not own this property," Richard Agent Reynolds replied, his voice deadly calm. "The federal government owns this property as of 10 minutes ago, and your high-priced country club lawyers cannot save you from a federal indictment." I decided it was time to personally deliver the final killing blow. I descended the grand, sweeping staircase with slow, measured, predatory steps. The crowd parted for me, immediately stepping back as if I were royalty. I walked past the shattered display case where Jamal was currently being hauled to his feet by his handcuffs. I walked past Olivia, who was still weeping hysterically on the sticky marble floor. I stopped directly in front of my father. Richard glared down at me, his eyes burning with intense, unadulterated hatred. "You did this?" he snarled, his voice shaking with rage. "You jealous, vindictive little monster? You called in a fake tip to ruin our anniversary." I smiled. A cold, bright, devastating smile. I reached inside the inner pocket of my tailored ivory blazer. I slowly pulled out a crisply folded piece of paper. It was the exact copy of the Mother's Day edition of the local Observer. The very same page Patricia had proudly handed out at the brunch, featuring my doctored pay stub and my ruined credit score. I unfolded the newspaper and held it up, making sure my father could see the bold headline apologizing for my existence. "I did not call in a fake tip, Dad," I stated, my voice projecting clearly across the silent, captivated room. "I simply audited the financial trap you so foolishly set for yourselves. But Jamal and Olivia are not the only ones leaving in handcuffs tonight." Richard frowned, his aggressive posture faltering slightly. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "I did not take out any loans. I have absolutely nothing to do with Jamal's business." "You signed the promissory note at the steakhouse as a secondary guarantor," I reminded him smoothly. "But your real crime is much more poetic." I tapped the newspaper article with my index finger. "You wanted to humiliate me so badly that you paid for this advertisement. But you did not stop there. You stood at the country club and proudly bragged to dozens of witnesses that you purchased 100 physical copies of this paper. You bragged that you stuffed them into envelopes and mailed them to our relatives across state lines and directly to my corporate office." I took a step closer to him, letting the absolute certainty of his doom settle over his features. "Under federal law," I explained, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving register, "utilizing the United States Postal Service to distribute digitally altered fraudulent financial documents with the intent to harm someone's reputation or employment constitutes a severe federal offense. It is called mail fraud. Each envelope you dropped into the mailbox is a separate count. You confessed to mailing 100 copies. That is 100 counts of federal mail fraud. The maximum penalty is 20 years in federal prison per count. You did not just humiliate me, Dad. You proudly sealed your own federal indictment." The color drained completely from Richard's face. The blustering, arrogant country club patriarch vanished instantly, replaced by a terrified, broken old man who suddenly realized he was going to die behind bars. He stared at the newspaper in my hand as if it were a loaded weapon. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Behind him, Patricia finally comprehended the absolute, inescapable ruin I had just laid out. She realized her husband was going to federal prison. She realized her golden child's boutique was seized. She realized her wealthy friends were watching her family be dismantled by law enforcement. The sheer psychological weight of losing her entire fabricated universe was too much for her fragile, narcissistic mind to process. Patricia let out a short, sharp gasp for air, her eyes rolling backward in her head. She collapsed completely, her emerald gown pooling around her as she fainted dead away onto the cold, hard marble floor. The heavy thud of my mother hitting the imported Italian marble did not elicit a single gasp of sympathy from the crowd. Nobody rushed to her aid. The country club elites simply took another collective step backward, physically distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of a federal crime scene. My father dropped to his knees beside Patricia, his hands trembling violently as he patted her pale cheeks completely, ignoring the federal agents who were now systematically securing the entire building. I looked down at them one last time. There was no sadness in my chest. There was no lingering childhood trauma begging for their affection. I simply turned around, adjusted the lapels of my immaculate ivory blazer, and walked out the front doors into the cool, crisp night air. I left them surrounded by shattered glass, seized assets, and federal indictments. 3 months passed with the brutal, unforgiving efficiency of the American justice system. The fallout was a masterclass in cold, absolute reality. I tracked the dismantling of their fraudulent empire through federal court dockets and bank liquidation reports, analyzing their ruin with the same detached precision I applied to my corporate clients. Jamal did not get a flashy trial. His high-priced defense attorneys took one look at the signed promissory note and the offshore cryptocurrency logs I had provided to the FBI, and they immediately advised him to accept a plea deal. He was sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary for aggravated identity theft and wire fraud. There is no early parole in the federal system. The arrogant broker who mocked my credit score is currently assigned to a prison laundry detail earning pennies an hour while the government aggressively liquidates his remaining assets to pay back the commercial lenders. Olivia experienced a similarly devastating reality check. Without my stolen credit to fund her extravagant lifestyle, her entire identity evaporated. The federal government seized the boutique, auctioned off every single custom silk gown, and froze her personal bank accounts. Because she actively signed the fraudulent debt acknowledgement, she narrowly avoided prison time only by agreeing to a massive financial restitution plan. The former golden child of the family, who once wore custom diamond tiaras and mocked my apartment, is now working a minimum wage retail job at a discount department store. She spends her days folding cheap sweaters and clocking out on a rigid schedule completely stripped of her fabricated luxury. But the most spectacular downfall belonged to my parents. The sheer magnitude of their arrogance was matched only by the severity of their punishment. The United States Postal Inspection Service and the FBI did not take the mail fraud charges lightly. Richard was formally indicted on 100 counts of federal mail fraud. The legal retainers required to keep him out of a jail cell pending trial completely drained their legitimate retirement portfolios. They hemorrhaged cash trying to fight the federal prosecutors. Within 2 months, they were forced into total bankruptcy. The social execution they feared more than anything else was swift and permanent. The Oak Ridge Country Club convened an emergency board meeting and unanimously revoked their memberships, banning them from the premises for life. Their wealthy friends blocked their numbers and pretended they never existed. Last week, the bank formally foreclosed on their sprawling suburban mansion. They were evicted from the fortress of expectations where they had spent 33 years, making me feel like an absolute failure. They currently live in a cramped, dark apartment on the outskirts of the city, drowning in legal fees and public disgrace. I stood on the wide concrete steps outside the federal courthouse, the morning sun reflecting off the towering glass windows. I was wearing a sharp charcoal gray power suit, my posture perfectly straight, my mind entirely focused on the future. I held my phone in my hand, watching a new voicemail notification pop up on the screen. The caller identification displayed my mother's name. I pressed play, holding the phone to my ear. Patricia's voice came through the speaker, frail, weeping, and dripping with manufactured desperation. "Natalie, please." She sobbed, her voice cracking pitifully. "Please pick up the phone. Your father's bail hearing is tomorrow, and the lawyers are demanding a retainer we simply do not have. We have lost the house. We have lost everything. You have a successful company. You have millions in your accounts. You have to help us. We are your family. We are so sorry for everything we did. Please, Natalie, do not leave us like this." I listened to the entire voicemail. My heart rate did not elevate. My breathing remained perfectly steady. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt, pity, or obligation. I looked down at the screen. I pressed the delete button, erasing her weeping voice from my device. Then I opened her contact file, selected the block caller option, and permanently severed her access to my life. I did the exact same thing for Richard, Olivia, and Jamal. I locked them out of my universe forever. A sleek black town car pulled up to the curb directly in front of the courthouse steps. The rear door opened and Harrison stepped out holding a thick leather portfolio. He adjusted his tie and smiled at me, projecting absolute corporate confidence. "Are you ready?" Natalie Harrison asked, gesturing toward the waiting vehicle. We have a meeting with the board of directors for the largest tech conglomerate in the state. We are about to close a multi-million-dollar auditing contract, and they specifically requested you as the lead investigator. I slipped my phone deep into my pocket, smoothing my charcoal blazer. I looked back at the federal courthouse one final time, leaving the ghosts of my toxic family behind me on the concrete steps. They had tried to bury me under a massive mountain of stolen debt and public humiliation, but they only succeeded in giving me the tools to build an empire entirely of my own. The story of Natalie's methodical dismantling of her family's fraudulent empire offers a chilling but deeply empowering lesson. The most effective weapon against toxic manipulation is unshakable composure and the enforcement of ironclad boundaries. In dysfunctional dynamics, manipulative individuals often rely on emotional volatility to maintain their control. They expect their victims to react with tears screaming or desperate pleas for validation. Natalie's family weaponized her identity, drained her financial resources, and orchestrated a public execution of her character, fully anticipating that she would crumble under the weight of their gaslighting. They wanted the satisfaction of her emotional defeat to fuel their own fabricated success. However, Natalie's triumph lay in her absolute refusal to play the role of the broken scapegoat. She taught us that you do not have to internalize the false damaging narratives that toxic people project onto you. Instead of engaging in a hysterical screaming match at a country club, she retreated, gathered undeniable facts, and let reality do the heavy lifting. She demonstrated that the ultimate defense against narcissistic abuse is not found in demanding apologies that will never come, but in cold, calculated self-reliance. When you stop seeking the approval of those who are committed to destroying you, you reclaim your power. Natalie's ability to walk away from her fainting mother and furious father without a single ounce of guilt underscores the absolute necessity of protecting your peace. Sometimes, the only way to survive is to permanently cut the anchor tying you to a toxic environment and focus entirely on building your own independent life. If you have ever felt trapped by the manipulations of toxic people, take a step back. Today, evaluate your boundaries and start fiercely protecting your own future.